In the wider Middle East, the Soviet invasion caused uncertainty as Arab countries that were traditionally close with the United States tried to figure out Moscow's next move. This was the first time the Soviet Union had invaded a country outside of the European bloc or Warsaw Pact, or even since World War II, and signaled a new aggressive trend for Soviet expansionism into the Arab world. We call it the Arab world, okay? There were also worries of the presence of Soviet forces in Afghanistan could embolden communist and even radical elements of their region or regime. We're not judging, this is the 70s we're talking about, okay? So except for the pro-Soviet radical Arab states like South Yemen, Syria, Algeria, and Libya, as well as the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the only non-state actor, most countries in the Middle East sided with the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt as they spearheaded support for the Afghan Mujaheddin, breaching their relationship with the Soviet Union for many years. Not until 1992 was the Rahada finally able to restore diplomatic relations with Moscow, Yeltsin's Moscow. So, the Soviet invasion also had some other repercussions and long-lasting effects. As the Cold War intensified, more countries drifted towards the two blocs. Several Middle Eastern countries were among the 65 nations that joined the US-led boycott of the 1980s Moscow Olympics, and in turn the communist world would do so for LA in 1984. But diplomatic relations were broken and trade relations were severed and severed. And no more AKs in the Middle East for you guys. And it took many years to repair the damage and restore the relationships to near normalcy. But even for the Soviets economically and physically, for the Middle East nations, a worrying development was the radicalization of its citizens, inspired by the call for jihad in Afghanistan. So in 1979, Sheikh Abdullah Hazam, the Palestinian Islamic teacher, played an instrumental role in issuing a fatwa or edict, along with several other well-known Muslim scholars, declaring jihad as the individual obligation of every Muslim. This was a departure from the Islamic law that made it the prerogative of the Muslim state or the Muslim ruler or the sultan or even certain mullahs, as now jihad can be called upon anyone and anything, and the individual decides the jihad. And it is still a holy war, so the state must sanction war, of course. Jihad! And this goes for fatwas, infadas, and jihads, as well as other wars and insurrection things, okay? The fatwa permitted many Arabs, including those who were living comfortably in the West, to travel to Pakistan en route to Afghanistan to join the war against the Soviet forces, the atheist invader, and among them was in time the term called the Afghan Arab, and it was coined to describe the mostly Arab veterans of the war in Afghanistan. Shocking, right? Those who returned home after the Soviet forces pulled out, or other times tried to recruit and organize others to wage war against their governments in their native state or non-state, as we're not statists, right? Afghan Arab fighters had the biggest impact in Algeria, where Darfa al-Afghani led an armed campaign in Algiers, and in Egypt where Aman al-Sohahi and Mohammed Shaluk al-Islamabudalin inspired violent attacks against their government. Abu Musab al-Zahaki and other militants who heralded the so-called Islamic State, or Daesh, also trained and fought in Afghanistan. Many were veterans headed to Bosnia-Herzegovina to fight in support of the Muslims against the Serbs and the Croats. All of these insurrections eventually collapsed, but not before causing significant damage in terms of life and property, and forcing target states to adopt a tougher, more cohesive measure that in time invited controversy and criticism. The defeat of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan and its subsequent breakup in 1991 reinforced the perception among many jihadists that if one superpower can be humble, so can others, and it was this belief that encouraged the militant fighters to take on the United States and its allies after the coalition invasion of Taliban-ruled Afghanistan in October 2001 to avenge Al-Qaeda and to direct the 9/11 attacks and start the war on terror in 2003. But anyway, guys, that is it. I'm getting some water, and I think that's about it. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. It's kind of awkward, but not bad either. You just gotta get used to it. But anyway, that was it. Hope you enjoyed. I'll skim through it all still because it's only 20 minutes and see what's the best. But I mean, this is how far I got with that other voice, so it doesn't really matter. But I guess the end could just be if it's and all the way up to the fatwa could be pretty good. So hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something, and I hope you stay safe. The defeat of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan and its subsequent breakup in 1991 reinforced the perception among jihadists that if one superpower can be humble, so can others, and it was this belief that encouraged the militant fighters to take on the United States and its allies after the coalition invasion of Taliban-ruled Afghanistan in October 2001, to avenge Al-Qaeda and direct the 9/11 attacks, and of course start the war on terror in 2003. But that is the story for another day. Learn something. Не привыкнуть к тому, что совсем мне не тянет плечо АКМ и в кустах.